I'm so hot, so funny. Hey everybody, how's it going? We're just gonna wait a little bit to let the page populate, but welcome back. Really great to be here with you all. I just got, my name's Sage Hayes, and this is the interviews for Embodied Liberation. We're in the second series, which I'll talk about in just a minute, but I just want to say, my name's Sage Hayes. I just got into Denver today, and I'm here with Margaret Roseanau. Hi everybody, at the School for Inner Health, and we're going to be talking about craniosacral therapy
And
biodynamics, and what that's all about.
Yeah.
And we're just really thrilled to be here. Margaret just opened her school, and I happen to be out here on work, so really happy to be sharing this amazing teacher that I've had with you, and colleague and friend, to bring you this, just hopefully some good wisdom.
Yeah.
Great.
Awesome. Love to share.
Great. Thank you for being on. So I want to say welcome back to all of us. It's been a little while since I did an interview. I think the last one I did was in Durham, North Carolina with Elliot. And I took a break and now got reinvigorated just in the past month to keep the interviews going. This is the second series. The first series was 24. I interviewed 24 healers, and they're all available to watch for free at embodiedliberation.com. And this is the third interview of the second series. And I just want to talk a little bit about what these interviews are about and why I do them. It's really like totally self-inspired and inspired by the people that I've gotten to meet and work with over the past 15 years of studying healing arts. And really a deep desire in my heart to really create more availability for people to understand what the healing arts is all about, folks who are sort of maybe on the margins of the healing arts, of the more traditional healing arts world, getting out of the medical sort of center, and what's going on in with creative ways people are using, and creative environments and creative strategies to take care of ourselves and to take care of each other. And it's really inspiring to see all the great work that practitioners are doing in their offices, but also in communities, in schools, in churches. And I really, this is just such a important piece that I feel like there's so many different types of healing that people don't know a lot about. They kind of get the gist of massage, or maybe have heard of Rolfing, or but really this is a chance for us to get into it a little bit deeper, and for you to be able to get to know a real practitioner, and we're going to have a nice dialogue. So that's a big part of what this is about. So thanks for watching. Great to have you with us if you're with us live, or if you're watching afterwards. I want to say a couple other things. It's been a really big week here in the U.S. anyway. There's been a lot that's happened, and there's been a lot of energy around Oprah's speech at the Golden Globes. And I've actually read a lot of critique of it, which I've been sort of like interested in. And I just want to read a couple of things here, just to kind of kick us off in the spirit of liberation and embodied healing. Even though there's been some critique of Oprah, there's also been a lot of support of her. And in that critique, there was one of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement, Alicia Garza, posted on her social media page and sort of put out an open question. And she asked on her timeline, what do we think is required to build a movement of millions? And the executive director of Race Forward had this incredible reply, and I want to read it because I think it's so important, and this is so the spirit of what these interviews are about catalyzing the healing world to be able to support the greater movements of social and economic change. Absolutely. So the executive director, Rinko Sen, said to the question, what's required to build a movement of millions, she said, in my humble 33-year-old view of social change, I think it takes everything we've got, every member, every leader, every ally, every platform, every tactic, every dime, all directed towards specific goals at specific moments. Those moments where you can take your ideas big don't come around that often. And when they do, we have to move. We can't predict what will come out of each tactic, but we can move, and we can move fast and big and on faith. She says of Oprah, of the whole thing that happened with Time's Up at the Golden Globe, she says, this is one of the most effective actions I've ever seen in the 33 years, pulled off by some of the best organizers I've ever known, and I've known a lot. She said the message discipline was unbelievable, and the call to action made it so much more than raising awareness. I mean, she said they organized the one and only Oprah to give one of the best social justice speeches I have ever seen. So I just want to bring that perspective in today, because it feels so, again, I just bringing the unifying messages and the unifying spirit is that we need everybody. And I just was really inspired by that, so I wanted to share. The second thing I want to share to you before we get to the interview is an ask, is a request to support this incredible project that's happening in Minneapolis. There's a current fundraiser going on called Biodynamic Liberation, and we're going to be talking about biodynamics today. There are the People's Movement Center, which is a healing arts center in Minneapolis, is creating a training specifically for biodynamic craniosacral practitioners, but specifically for Native American, Black, people of color, trans, queer healers to train in a 2-year certified craniosacral program, which is really amazing. And for the purpose of creating community-based access to healing and bodywork. This cohort would weave together with many other healers of color and trans and queer healing practitioners who are approaching their work from a healing justice lens. Specifically, the funds would go to completely cover tuition of up to 15 Black, Brown, and Native cohort members in the upcoming training in the Twin Cities. Isn't that amazing?
That's awesome.
Right? Like, this is so
That's
good,
awesome.
right? And it's a huge piece of support for this, and they're raising $50,000. And so I really, if you're watching this, or if at any point, I saw that somebody just posted it in the comments, so thank you, Claudia, for posting that, the link to fundraise. So please give $1, give $5, give $250. Investing in people of color, investing in Native folks, investing in trans and queer healers who are at the margins and who can work with people at the margins is critical at this time. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about what biodynamic craniosacral is, so you'll know exactly what you're supporting and how awesome it is. So I wanted to tell you that too. Margaret, you had a local, we want to make sure we get the local resource here in Denver in too, so she's going to talk about that, and then we're going to start the interview.
Great.
So it's actually in Boulder, which is near here. Some good friends of mine have started and are running a Boulder Craniosacral Community Clinic. And it's bouldercraniosacralclinic.com. It's a local bi-monthly resource for people of lesser means or, more accessible to receive this work on an ongoing basis. And they're doing a fantastic job, and they're getting great responses. So check them out if you're local.
Great. So it's a low-cost craniosacral clinic in Boulder, Colorado.
Twice a month.
Twice a month. And what's the website again?
bouldercraniosacralclinic.com.
Great. Awesome. And they can also contact you with more questions.
Absolutely.
Just to be directed. Super.
Absolutely.
Awesome. That's perfect. It's so great to have a local clinic happening. And they're popping up. We really want to support folks who are creating accessible clinics all over. So thank you for all of you out there who are supporting these efforts, and the practitioners who are taking the time to do that. So with that, I want to start the interview again. I'm Sage Hayes. This is Margaret Roseanau. We're here at the newly opened School for Inner Health, and in Denver, Colorado. It's so exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Awesome to have you here.
I know, it's so timely. I happen to be here on work with this, my other work, so I mean, it's all connected. And we're sitting in the classroom, which is so cool. So it's just like such a wonderful thing. Actually, I'll give you a little view down here. That's the classroom, which is really cool. So it's awesome to be here. Oh, that we don't need to see that. So just first of all, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, I'm Margaret Roseanau, and I fell in love with this work over a couple decades ago, about in the mid-90s, and found it through my own healing process. And sometimes I feel like it called me. Sometimes I feel just insanely blessed to have followed that calling as best I could over time, and to suddenly have this platform, and like you were talking about, place to help people learn skills that they can take into the world and make a difference. I mean, that's what I'm about, and that's what this work is about, and it really changes lives, and it's organized my life, and it affects everything. But aside from it, I'm a mom and a wife and see clients, and even though I don't have a lot of time anymore to do these things, I love to sew, I love to dance, I love to write. I'm working on some writing. I love to be outside. I love being in Colorado. I love skiing, and we need more snow.
Mm-hmm. The East Coast would be happy to share with you.
Yes, I'm sure they would. And I love watching people have a new perspective and being part of supporting that. Really being part of opening someone's mind or heart or perception, whether it's through the body or through a thought process or a way of thinking, to go, oh, it's more here than I thought there was, you know, and to keep that doorway open.
Yeah, that's so much about what this work is about.
Right. Right. So
great.
Yeah.
So just to real quick say, I got a chance to meet Margaret. I was living and working at the Hartwood Institute in Northern California, which is a residential healing arts school, and I'm not sure if I was cooking in the kitchen at that point or the director of student affairs. It could have been some of both. And we were so lucky to have you as a teacher of the craniosacral module for the students at the Hartwood Institute. So I know some of the folks out there will be excited to see you from Hartwood. It was such a special time.
It was about 10 years ago-ish.
Yeah.
9 or 10 years ago.
Yep, it was about that. It was like 2007. And I'll just say before we start talking about craniosacral, like your teaching and the teaching of biodynamic craniosacral was a game changer for me as somebody who was interested. I would say I was interested in healing at that point, and specifically with trauma. And the principles that you laid down in such a short course, in a way, are fundamental to who I am as a person now. Wow. How I am, how I see the world, and how I love, actually, too. And so that's what, that course is more foundational probably than any other course I've taken.
Wow.
And it wasn't like a course, it's like a real way of seeing the world. Right. And it's a real way of seeing a person across from you and seeing their essence and seeing the perfection of health, which we're going to talk about a little bit, or a lot, actually. So,
and the fact that you've been able to maintain it, it speaks to the way you can access this and then return to it. Like it's a route. It's not just a concept, or it's some, Yeah,
it's not a skill, it's a perspective.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a
and
way of seeing.
And then there's skill in it, but...
Oh, yeah, well, of course, totally.
But it's, when you come from that perspective, a whole other thing can open up.
Yeah. So let's just jump in a little bit, to talk a little bit about, biodynamic. Biodynamic craniosacral is like a mouthful. And I actually don't like saying it because I feel like people are like, whoa. Either people are like...
You lost them by the time
what's
you get
that?
to the end. Yeah.
Yeah, they're totally captivated. They're just like, that's weird, and let's move on. So, for any of that spectrum of people, I'd love to just hear, just talk a little bit about what, in this moment, what it means to you or what it is.
Okay. I think I'll start by trying to talk, because some people have heard of craniosacral therapy more than biodynamic craniosacral therapy, or maybe heard about that first. So it's a bodywork modality that has its roots in osteopathy, and in the work of Dr. Andrew Taylor Still from the 1800s, who had also a different way of perceiving, partly from his time with indigenous people. But it's a perspective that talks about wholeness and wellness as inherent and essential, and how to return to that. And there's different ways to do that, and there's been some different schools of thought around what is craniosacral therapy. But the biodynamic piece for me, biodynamic craniosacral therapy, is a way of labeling being with that dynamic unfolding in the moment, being with how health is always present, is not always equally accessible, but always there. Like one of my teachers, Anna Chitty, loves to say, it can only be obscured, it can't be erased. And that essential knowing is part of what we cultivate as biodynamic craniosacral therapists. And in the body, the way it's been traditionally taught and understood for those who may or may not know, the cranium being the head, the sacrum being the bone at the base of the spine. And so the relationship of the spine and the fluids in the spine to the rest of the body, and the inherent natural rhythms that move through that fluid, and the profound access that people have found over the last 100 years to intelligence in the fluid, in the cerebrospinal or craniosacral fluid.
Okay, so intelligence in like that to
I
so
know.
many people would be like, what do you mean? Like, how would somebody know? Like, how would somebody access that? Or
That's a good question.
what
it takes is cultivating a level of presence in yourself and a level of receptivity, and actually a willingness not to know and not to demand. I think that one of the revolutionary qualities of this work is it requires us to cultivate things that the modern world doesn't necessarily help us cultivate, like patience and humility and receptivity to something slower and deeper, that is willing to be in conversation, able to be in conversation. So when I talk about accessing intelligence, for me it's literal, like having a conversation with the inherent wisdom in you, in me, in us. And there is a way to do that with your hands and your presence, and actually be able to track and feel and palpate what the rhythms in the body are doing, and what the movement of the spinal fluid is doing, and to be able to cultivate rest in that, and cultivate space, and a deepening of relationship. Is that a little more?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. I want to rewind just a minute, if you don't mind, and we're going to come back to kind of what biodynamic craniosacral is. Because I think you said something really interesting, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Of the origins of craniosacral therapy had some sort of overlap with indigenous people.
Yeah.
And I was curious just to be thoughtful about that piece, and kind of like how. Can you share a little bit more about that, or?
Yeah, I want to be really careful because I'm not sure that I can name the tribe accurately that Dr. Still studied with, or lived with, but it might have been Shawnee. But there was this white man, Dr. Andrew Taylor Still, who had some time living in an indigenous community and with indigenous people, and I don't have a lot of knowledge about how it changed his perception, but I know from my own explorations with understanding indigenous and getting some exposure to indigenous ways of thinking, that there's something essential about us being part of the ecosystem of the world, and the world being alive and non-hierarchical in that sense. Like everything has a place and a purpose, and is living, as one of my teachers, Martine Prechtel, would say, according to its nature. And I think that kind of understanding influenced Still and made him look at the world differently. I'm not sure exactly what his experience was.
Yeah.
But I think, in my own belief and in my own understanding, like that indigenous root or that way of knowing is part of all of our history, in the sense that we all come from, some of us are much closer to it and some of us are living on marginalized edges because of it, but there is, like, within us a way of relating to the world that for a lot of white culture has been forgotten
Mm-hmm.
or never known.
Right.
Like, but somewhere back
Right.
was known.
Of course. Yeah, like that deep wisdom is in our bones and in our lineage, and
Right.
even ways of healing that we can remember through the practice of XYZ
Right.
can come through.
And when I teach this work of biodynamic craniosacral therapy and biodynamics as a paradigm of thinking or perception, it really is for me about helping people access their own inherent rhythms and their own, not spontaneous, but real, maybe sometimes spontaneous, relationship to the world around them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just about supporting a client, it's about being in a kind of relationship where you feel supported by something bigger or can feel that at moments.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the dynamism of life unfolding in the moment and being something that, from what I'd like to believe in, or what I've heard from other Indigenous people, is something that was always just known
Mm-hmm.
and was just, yeah, of course, rather than,
Mm-hmm.
wow, what a radical thought.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
only 2018 that makes it a little bit of a radical thought.
Right.
And part of my desire is to sort of take us back down the road or bridge that gap a little so that it's a little less radical and we're a little more living that way.
Right. Right. And I think our job, partially as white people and white practitioners and white teachers, is to think, is to really be thoughtful about both, like holding that sort of course, that lineage inside of us as like our healing lineages, right?
Right.
And then also kind of like that piece of the history of the craniosacral lineage that was about a white guy
Studying with
indigenous people, and how are we being responsible to that? Like,
Right.
how are we unpacking that? And
how are we honoring that? Because I'm not sure it is getting honored.
Right, exactly. And like how, yeah, and I think we really need to, push the edge a lot more on that, especially because a lot of these healing, it's part of like why the People's Movement Center training is so exciting in
That's
Minneapolis,
so cool.
because it's centering people of color's experience and wisdom within a modality that has roots in, indigenous
White men
wisdom.
and indigenous wisdom
Right,
that
but
was
has
carried
been-
forward by
Right,
white men.
exactly. So like I'm excited for them to sort of, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of great conversations about grappling with that and unpacking that. And I want to encourage like teachers and, other folks that have this type of history, right? Is like, as white people, we want to be, especially within the healing arts world, we want to be slowing down at that moment in our history. And because in 2018, we have to unpack that.
Right.
Like, we can't just sort of say, yeah, that's how it happened. It's like, well, how did that happen? And then white people went on and packaged it and are making a lot of money and doing the thing. It's like, let's, there's still time actually to really start to get critical about that piece and be
For sure.
thoughtful. And, and I want to just keep this, the interviews for Embodied Liberation, keep pushing that edge particularly in the white healing arts world, right?
No, I think it's really important.
And I
I've been
appreciate that.
talking among some of my staff about that too, like how do we honor the lineage and how do we, then keep morphing something, because another thought that is always in my thinking in terms of building this school is as a legacy that lives beyond me, and so that means that multi-generational thinking, which is another thing that white culture doesn't
Right.
promote or
Yeah.
respect. And so again, acknowledging where those thoughts in me come from, coming from spending time with other people who are more indigenous or
Mm-hmm.
are indigenous, and not wanting to appropriate or claim,
Mm-hmm.
but also wanting white people to come home to like, okay, who you are,
Right.
and you have this root too, and don't keep going and trying to appropriate it from someone
Nice.
else. And
Nice.
in order to get to your root, you're going to have to go through your grief, you're going to have to go
Mhm.
through your racism, you're going to have to go through your, double binds of descending from people who were oppressive, and etc.
Yep. Right. And oppressed probably
And
too,
both,
because they're usually
right.
in, all lineages have like war and oppression in them. So,
Right.
yeah.
And yet, as in my experience watching myself and other white people often wanting to identify more with the being oppressed and
Right.
wanting to push away
That's right.
any connection to an oppressor.
Right.
And you can't. If we're going to shift this,
That's right.
if we're going to unpack it,
Right.
we have to hold both.
We absolutely do. Yeah, and as healers, and as white healers, we especially have to hold both.
I agree. Right.
And there's lots of, I think there's just more and more ways we have to keep pushing our own personal edges and helping with accountability with each other. So I just want to say I really appreciate you having this conversation with me right now live on Facebook, because it's, it's a touchy
Right, 'cause
one
it's
for
an
most
edge
people.
right.
For white people it is.
Right,
you know.
for sure. And I mean, there's certainly people who would say you shouldn't go there.
Right, or that it's not relevant. But it's completely relevant, especially if it's relevant to everything, but it's relevant because it's part of the root of the history of biodynamic craniosacral therapy.
Right, and it's also relevant because this studying biodynamic craniosacral therapy, I mean, it's awesome. Give money to this cause in Minneapolis because it's not accessible. It's not economically accessible. You know, I have a dream of creating a scholarship fund here, but right now I'm just trying to gather people, and I can't offer a lot of discounts to whatever, to make it accessible. It's part of the conversation to make it accessible too.
Right, right. And how can we help you think creatively about that now? Even at the beginning, like
Even
how
at the
we as a
beginning,
community can help Margaret start to think about, like, well, can we actually start to help support your school to generate, the resources that it would need from the get-go, so there's that representation and access.
Right. And then is my thought that I can't actually just a thought that's coming from my own level of privilege and comfort, rather than am I willing to push my edge?
Right.
And because that's,
yeah,
that's a whole other
love it.
question.
Great. Thank you for.
And I can feel that.
Yeah.
I'm like,
how do you-
there's an edge in there.
Yeah, what's it feel like?
Oh, it's it's kind of bubbly and hot, and the place of my own comfort and discomfort with the privileges I have.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the line of like, where do you push towards? I mean, for me, I think this last 2017 awakening for me was partly like getting a tiny whiff of what a lot of oppressed people have gone through, just in the sense of the world being less safe and less predictable, and the whole thing that take a whole bunch of structures that I took for granted might not continue to exist, and even the primacy or the supremacy of the United States being questioned, right? Which I've always hated, actually, on one level, and yet I'm comfortable in, and have
and are
had
protected by,
have the privilege of, have traveled the world and been, benefited by and struggled with both, right? So it's that, how do we dance on our edges? And I think biodynamic craniosacral therapy is a profound modality. Obviously, I think that. But I think it helps people build the resources to be on their edge.
Let's talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah, I love that.
I love that too. And it's not easy, as other teachers of mine have said. It takes an amazing amount of support to actually live at that edge where you can make a difference, where you can be effective in social change or in personal change, right? And personal change, in some ways, precedes social change, or personal work.
Right, it's like a dynamic interplay between social change and personal change and edges, right?
Right.
Because if something from the outside doesn't sometimes push our edge,
right,
so we wouldn't change. So it's like this cool.
And I used to think, there was a profound moment for me about 15 years ago or so when I realized, I'm always putting myself on the edge. Like, there's a part of me that likes to push that edge, and yet there's certain edges that are still scary. And I think what biodynamics and biodynamic craniosacral therapy does is it gives us palpable access to what is well.
Okay.
So, if we're going to be social change activists, or when we are, high rate of burnout, high rate of overwhelm, high rate of pushing ourselves physically and emotionally past our edges, and just the practice of the skills to take time and pause and perceive what is well, or get the support of a practitioner to actually hold the space and the physical contact to be in contact with that wellness, because like I said earlier, it's always there.
Yeah.
But what we both know from our work is that even a few minutes of touching into that is not just life-changing, but it's reorienting. Like, oh, it's now on the menu. It's a little more on the menu.
Right, it's a little bit more experienced. Like there is wellness here.
Right.
Even though it hasn't felt like it.
Right. Because I'm not attuned to it, or because it's been obscured by my illness or my struggle or whatever.
Yeah, my stress. Yeah.
My stress. And the stress doesn't go away. It's not, one of the things I love about this work is it forces me to be real.
Mm-hmm.
It's like sitting with a newborn baby, which is something that people who do this work can choose to do. And babies are always, and kids are always telling you exactly where you are.
Mm-hmm.
But this work does that too.
Mm-hmm.
Because the minute I'm trying to do what I think should be done, or access what I know is there, I'm warbling the field. I need to be with what is.
Okay, so what you just said was so important. Okay, so you said so many important things, but the thing you said was like, okay, if I'm with somebody, now this is both for craniosacral practice, but this is just together with somebody too, right?
Right.
Right. Like if I'm being present with you, and all of a sudden my agenda is coming in, or, I think something's going on, and I'm all focused on it. That's where the attention goes.
Right.
And then that's what's experienced.
Right. And then here is the health underneath it, or right there. If the health is bigger, if the wellness is bigger than that, then we can stay with both.
Yeah.
But when it becomes like, oh, now I'm in it.
Yeah.
Right? So it's that edge. It's part of the edge. Part of what I mean when it gives people the ability to be with the edge is it gives them more felt sense of where those edges are.
Yeah.
And a sense, I mean, the tissues can change, the fluids shift when there's more stress.
Right. Right.
Or when we're going back into the memory of a difficult experience, or when we're living in the midst of a difficult experience.
Right. Of course the tissues are in a response. They're in a
Right.
survival response.
Right. And they need, they are supported when a practitioner can say, okay, I'm going to help you.
Or a friend.
Or a friend.
Right, in craniosacral, right? But
Right.
But the application to just
Right,
in general.
or a friend, a person.
Right, a person.
Can just say, hey, remember, what's going well? Or, hey, I'm right here with you. And
Right.
it's 2018.
Right.
And social change is happening.
Right.
And life is shifting.
Right.
And you're okay.
Right. And you're having fear.
Right.
And you're this and that. But
Right.
and again, it's like creating that capacity for both to be felt versus just the just the fear or the
Right.
edge.
And what's the level of threat that your body needs to respond to right now, and really
Mm-hmm.
orienting to now and going, oh, well, actually, I mean, anything could happen, but this is pretty safe right here.
Right.
And then pausing and getting that. Even
Right.
getting that.
When you say getting it, what do you mean by that?
I mean, feeling it, or feeling something, breathing more deeply, feeling your feet a little bit more, coming in a little, maybe not into your body, but just into the room a little bit more. Like, oh yeah, I'm here.
Right.
You're here.
Right.
We know each other 10 years and we're comfortable. Here we are. Like,
Right.
this is okay.
Right. 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 And letting that, just trying to, and as practitioners, what we do is we try to open up a little bit more space. We try to help open up a little bit more space for that to be experienced.
Right.
So that the system can maybe have a little bit of a, which then the tissues respond to that.
Right.
The stress
and then
response.
the fluids come in, because whenever, one of the things I talk about a lot in the training is, whenever there's restriction or stress, there's a holding pattern, right? And that holding pattern creates dryness in the system, or immobility in the system, but literal dryness. And so even just a being with a person who can recognize something more fluid, or something a little wider, something other than this, or even hold it for you. That's a lot of what craniosacral therapists and other kinds of healing practitioners do, is they just hold that thing with you, and then you're not as alone with it.
Right, and just feeling that, right? Just like, oh, that's so, it's like, oh, just like
Right.
holding that.
And it goes, oh, you see me. I'm seen.
Right,
Right.
right, and there's a little space.
Right.
Some
And
care.
so whenever space is being made, whenever breath comes in, whenever people settle in whatever way they do, there's clearly some more safety or some more presence, right? Because we're not going to unwind if it's not
Right.
safe.
Right. And not only is it nice to feel safe, more the body starts to be able to go back into like a more sort of like the systems start to work better and health, just more
Right.
health is allowed.
And there's more health accessible,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Because something can always be there, but that doesn't mean you can always access it.
Yep.
Right, and that's a lot of what I think biodynamic craniosacral therapy does over time, like in the trainings, teaching practitioners how to really access fluid and tissue and bone and be in relationship to them with a level of increased specificity, so that you can recognize what the issues are, but not get tunneled into them, because you can see them and hold a wider perspective at the same time. And the more I do this work, the more I think almost that's the magic.
Totally.
Is the ability to hold both the struggle and the wellness.
Yeah.
And so often...
I love that. The ability to hold both the struggle and the wellness simultaneously.
Simultaneously, which is not something I do 24/7 at all.
Amen. No, I'm
But
testifying to that.
But if I can do it, I can do it in sessions with people and in classes with people, and I can do it more in my own life from being impacted and healed through this work, you know.
Yeah.
And even the attempt to do it is revolutionary, because
Yeah.
even the attempt is different from the world out there.
That's beautiful. Right.
You know?
Even the attempt to pay attention to wellness
And struggle.
and struggle
Or
is,
to pay attention to wellness alone.
Right.
But then to hold both.
Right.
And not buy into or step out of for a minute that the polarized culture we live in. I mean, the culture we live in right now is saying, choose sides, you know. This is good, this is bad. And to be able to go, this is. You know, or even attempt to create that, or hold it for a few minutes, or in the space for a few days. Changes people's nervous system, changes what's possible, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I'm getting goosebumps. Like, it's about creating that possibility with capacity.
Right.
You know, so someone can actually do that for themselves, for someone else, or reach out and be like, hey man, can you talk to me for a minute and remind me about that?
Right.
Because I can't remember right now.
Yeah, remind me what's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And then through this particular modalities, there's certainly many, but through biodynamic craniosacral therapy, there really is like tangible, recognizable, consistent, felt sense of that wellness. Which...
How do you learn how to feel that?
I guess you have to come take the class. I'm not sure I can say that in a few minutes. But but one of the primary ways you learn it is by, you know, finding those edges in your own body and finding that same capacity in your own body of, here's my challenges, here's my wellness, here's where I can really, you know, like I can feel more embodied in my legs than my upper body. Okay, let me check out my legs a little bit more. Let me be with where I can
stay with
feel.
what's well.
Stay with what's well. Or
Or
maybe I don't even want to
a
be
little bit better.
Right.
Or maybe I don't even want to be
Totally embodied, but I
Right.
can feel the fabric of my clothes a little bit more, and there's a little more container, and a little more. I'm feeling a little more held by something. Oh. Right. So, because there's always something bigger than we can see, and in craniosacral work there really is an organizing. They call it the organizing principle, or the inherent treatment plans in biodynamic work. That there is an inherent known way, like that there is an intelligent presence that when we tune into it within ourselves or within another, can guide us along the route to our own healing in a way that we couldn't plan. That if we try to, we're gonna not find that more inherent knowing. It's like, I think of like deer following the path of least resistance down a mountain. You know, like they don't take the hard route. Animals,
Right.
animals take the easier way.
Right.
Humans have been socialized to do a whole bunch of things.
Right.
But how can we find that place of ease and follow it?
Right. Because still in our bodies, which there's that primal wildness, there's the depth of millions of years of evolution of intelligence.
Right.
And so like underneath the layers of conditioning and trauma and wounds and stress, underneath all that is a deep principle of intelligent health.
Right.
Like it's like if I scratch my arm, it starts to heal immediately. There's no trying in that. Like it's, you know, my mother broke her ribs. Hi, Mom. Like 3 weeks ago, and she's doing so much better. She said, "All my bruises all gone in like 3 weeks, three
Wow.
ribs," and it's like, that's amazing. And we it's almost like we miss one of the very most potent powers on the planet, which is our very
inherent healing potential.
Exactly.
Capacity, not just potential.
Exactly.
And part of, I think, what biodynamic craniosacral work does is it helps us turn that potential into capacity.
Say more about that.
Well, one of the things we talk about is potency,
Yeah.
which I like to think of as sort of that potential, but it's also a moving, again, something that you can track the access to in the body, the potency. And when we remind the body of its own capacity, it goes, oh yeah, on some level.
Right.
Yeah.
Like when we pay attention that.
To that wellness.
Right.
And when we say, you know.
Right.
I mean, I often say to my students, I'm just here to remind you
Right.
of what you already know. Like, we all have bodies, we all have these same anatomical structures within us, and we know how this works. It's inherent to our being.
Right.
And so tuning into that and creating the conditions where someone can actually make that perceptual and physical shift towards their own wellness catalyzes potential into a reality of real change.
Totally.
You know, one of the men who is in the lineage, a man named Roland Becker, at a certain point in his career, put everything aside and just had people get on the table, and he just listened.
Yeah.
And he didn't do. And he didn't know necessarily what he was tracking at times, but clients would come back and say, I don't know what you're doing, but I cleaned my entire closet, or I finally quit that job, or, you know, I'm making positive change. I'm becoming more something that's essential to who I am.
Right. From him sitting.
From just being
making contact.
Being witnessed.
And listening. Right, because listening is an active. Listening seems so like, you know, like, oh, it's listening, but it's like deep listening. Like deep listening to really like listen to the truth of what is emerging from you, or what wants to emerge from your body, from your voice, from your heart. Is like, I don't know, like what could be more important than that? Really? Like what could be more important to say or do?
I don't know.
You know,
really.
Because
But the way we teach it, and the way I teach it in the training, and the way the curriculum is set up, it's also getting more skill with anatomy and more skill with tissues and fluids and bones, so that when you listen, you can actually hear the depth of a conversation being spoken by the body, right? That's saying, it's this right temporal bone, and it's the story of what happened to me when I was 8 that I want you to see now. Or, you know, I came here to tell you that story, but actually I got to tell you about how I fell on my elbow 3 weeks ago, and it's, you know,
still wobbling through my system.
Right. So that's part of that inherent treatment plan, is what needs to happen next, right? Which is a common question in a lot of somatic work. What's the body want to show or do now?
Right.
But the more knowledge, more information we have to recognize that response, doesn't mean we have to do any more, but it means we can understand more, and then the body is seen more.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so really getting the depth of so many of the layers of understanding anatomy and fluids and...
Right, and bones and structures and nervous system and the relationship of the gut to the brain and the face, and the spaces and the, all of those things are things that these kinds of trainings talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also really interested, as an owner of a school now, in bringing the principles of it outside of bodywork, so that people can come here and they can choose to study craniosacral therapy and become craniosacral therapists, which again is a bodywork modality that is more than bodywork, but is taught as a
right. Specifically, we're going to be working with people on tables.
And touching them.
Yep.
But there's so many professions where you can't touch people.
Right.
But you could still take the principles of presence and what is well, and how can I sit with myself so that I can be neutral to what is not well and what is well with you, and help you hold both.
Right. It's so applicable.
It's so applicable. And how can I learn about skin tone or nervous system activation or tension and stress, and what are the signs of wellness, and how can I visually see that, and how can I support that, and when can I get a sense in my own body of a little edge, and sit with that and let it shift. And
right.
I'm super excited about widening into that field and touching as many people as possible with the perception of well-being. Even especially in this time on planet.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, we need it.
Yeah.
So it would be cool for you to, just to just even think about, okay, well, how could I just go teach a class somewhere that would be totally random, like totally not in a bodywork sense,
right.
And
well,
just try it.
I've made a class.
Cool. Of course you have.
A 3-day class.
It's awesome.
To attempt to do that.
Great.
And we're having a next one at the end of January.
Great,
so,
great. Well, we'll
can
put
always
that.
check that out.
Okay, good.
But I keep kind of rolling in my mind, so I think I'm going to go back to that edge. How much are we good on time?
Yeah, we have about, believe it or not, it's just 10 minutes.
Whoa.
Ish.
Is there more you want to ask me?
No, go. Whatever's rolling around. Let's do it.
Well, I want to kind of roll back to that edge about the indigenous root and the way it's been carried and either honored or not. And I'm not quite sure what I want to say, so I'll just attempt to say, part of what I was wanting to speak to around people having some access to their own natural sense is I really want to honor the natural forces in the world that, have been there before humans and before different people decided to take it and make it a modality or make it into something. Like just having a relationship with those formative forces in the world, those tides and winds and the weathers and the way things move, and also embryologically is another thing that we talk about in terms of how the body forms. And
that was one of my favorite parts of your class, was talking about embryology, which was mind-blowing to me. Can you just say a little tidbit about that?
Well, one of the things that Franklin Sills and others, Franklin Sills was a man in England who is still alive and around, and a wonderful person who helped put this curriculum together, and he liked to say, that the forces that created us are still creating us. Yes, we were formed in our mothers, and if you think about it, we had to form a heart, we had to form a nervous system, we had to form a brain, but something knew how to do that, right? And that's that, intelligence with a capital I. What organizes this? But it's still organizing us. And one of the reasons we talk about embryology and teach and learn about embryology in the trainings is because when we can recognize and access those earlier formative forces or formative motions, it's a route to a more original wellness in ourselves, right?
Why is that?
Because epigenetically, we all form in a similar way. There can be conditions in the early weeks of life that can affect that formation for sure. But there's an understanding that it's beyond or before genetics or culture, that there's a knowing of how the human body forms that's in all of us equally. And in that place and those formations have been there for millions of years, right? And that's and it's not gone. like this, I just turned 51 last week. If it's still there, right? It's still unfolding and informing me. Those original motions and those early times for sure have an impact on how I see the world and on my health and well-being as they're learning more and more. But it's also, for me, I can say it, but I feel like I can't really get across what happens in my body and it's still happening, right? So it's a different relationship to time. It's not then and now, it's continuous. And it's like the health that never goes away. It's an expression of that. So does that?
Love it.
Yeah.
Both the embryology, but then also let's see how I don't know if I have a thing to say about this, but just the deep presence of like if we're living and we're breathing, there's always the deep presence of vast health and intelligence. Like it's just so.
It just is.
And, no matter how much crap's going on in somebody's life, or, I often think, in the world of like the trauma, blah, 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 there's just still so much pathology where people, there's just so many boxes that we're still putting each other in around health and mental health. And it's like, to me, the person who comes in or who I meet that has the most going on or the most stacked against them, we need to look at the systemic creation of those health issues, but they are the most resilient because they are still alive.
Right.
And so we don't have to go far to look for the wellness in that system.
No.
Because if they're living, they're breathing, they're talking, it's like there's such vast health. And so if we can start to like support that system a little bit more, it's actually gonna evolve, and it's gonna likely get healthier pretty quick because the resilience is so deep and so strong.
Right, and the resilience built out of having to meet those resistances and those challenges, right? Like, it's not the people who have it all that do as well as, and it's not the ones that have no support that do well. It's the ones that have some, that have an easier time. It's the ones that have enough challenge, but not so much that they can't also have periods of rest and grow that resiliency.
That's right. Right, and then what that's doing for humanity, I think, is evolving the physiological and the neurobiology of our systems, of like that quality of stress where there's systemic oppression, and there's like very real things, and it's like if it's within a bit of a window, if there's enough resilience, it's like I feel like for all me, like the ways that we've been resilient in our life, and certainly many more people than us that have been more resilient, they're actually doing a favor for evolution of the planet. Absolutely. Because that's actually evolving the intelligence of the nervous system.
Right, and the resilience of the nervous system.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely. Yeah, and I think it's a really profound.
It is not to validate systemic oppression. I don't mean it like that. I just think it is a interesting. It demands there's more health comes to the surface, and like it's that the muscles get strengthened both metaphorically and otherwise.
Right, and then it's upon us as white people who have it easier in that sense, who have less oppression to struggle against, to build our own muscles, to not look to the people oppressed to somehow rise out of this thing, but to change the structures that are oppressive inside ourselves and the levels of comfort, like we were talking about earlier, right?
Absolutely.
And just be like, okay.
Yeah.
Or
to let the structures, just the things that really aren't. It's just the same as craniosacral work. It's like, what's the truest thing that can emerge from a body? Like, what's the truest health? It's the same with the collective. It's like, at the margins, whether it's people of color or trans people or queer people or disabled people or poor people, it's like if we look anywhere 360 degrees at the margins of the margins, the solutions are actually there.
Yes.
Right? And it's the same way with the body.
It's the same way with the body. If you look at any restriction, the potency to heal that restriction is sitting right in it.
Yeah.
It's right in it.
Exactly.
And if you can either focus on the restriction or you can focus on the potency. But it's yes, it's that simple, and no, it's that simple.
Totally.
Not that simple.
Right. But the medicine.
But the medicine is here already. We're not, we don't. It doesn't need to come from the inside, outside. It needs to come from inside our own willingness and our own perception.
Yeah, and helping each other out with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And reminding each other.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I need to be reminded as early as this morning. I need to be reminded, right? So,
Yeah. Oh,
or as
totally.
recently. So, yeah.
So some of the things from here is like helping each other, like point out the wellness that's in each other, that I see in you and you see in me.
Right, and finding, just being able to feel the support that's there when it's there in a real way, even if it's support of the chair I'm sitting on, or the fact that I have, that I'm warm enough and feeling into that warmth, or that my belly is fed, or that I have enough money to go get what I need to feed myself, maybe, or, just keeping it simple and real and concrete.
Yep.
And whatever it can help cultivate that sense of being in relationship to something that's supportive and supporting. The life goes on. Yeah. We have end dates, but life goes on. So.
Yeah, well said. Is there anything else that feels really important to share today about your work and your hope for the work and work on the planet and craniosacral?
I guess I just feel very humbled and grateful to be in the position to have a platform that people can come and explore these ideas. And I welcome you to call or email, ask questions. I love talking about this stuff. I love thinking about it. I love being pushed to think about it differently. And I'm just really grateful that to everyone out there who's doing what they can do to make the world a better place. That sounds cliche. I don't mean it that way. But I feel grateful and I feel hopeful and excited for what will unfold here and in me, and what it's going to look like to bring biodynamics into other fields besides bodywork. And I'm rolling around in my head an educator's program on how to educate people who already educate and train people to use these principles more fully in their work.
I'd love to work with you on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got the beginning stages of it. I've got a huge vision. We'll see how many years it takes to come in, but I'm super excited, and thanks so much for taking the time, and for you for landing here today and being in this space.
Oh yeah, well, if we're here, we're here. Now's the time.
Now's the time.
Thank you so much. Website is
www.schoolofinnerhealth.org.
Great.
And phone number is 303-999-9963. And classes are kind of ongoing all the time. We're gathering people for our next full 2-year craniosacral training. It's about 2 years, about 21 months. And the beginning classes of that will be early February and mid-April.
February 2018.
2018 and April 2018, and we'll have another class starting in 2019. So we're starting a new full training every year-ish, and also have a 3-day biodynamic principles class that really is the first step of taking this off the body.
So somebody can come just take 3 days,
take 3 days,
get an introduction, not have to commit to the whole thing.
Nope, and you can also come and take 5 days of the craniosacral bodywork, and you don't have to commit to the whole thing.
Great. Do you have to be a body worker who can do this?
Nope, anyone can do this.
Okay, great.
Anyone can do this.
Great. Awesome.
So, and there's also a 5-day nervous system class. You have to either take the 3-day class or the 5-day cranial intro in order to take that nervous system class.
Great.
Or if you're already a practicing therapist working in the field of trauma for at least 3 years, you can come take that class.
That's great.
So,
awesome. So you can look at all that information and
it's
class
all
descriptions
online,
on the website.
It is pretty clear, and if you have any questions, again, you can reach out. Also, the email is info@schoolofinnerhealth.org.
Awesome. That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time and your work in the planet, and
Thank you,
thanks for being willing to just really go up against some edges.
Oh yeah.
Which was really just awesome. Just appreciate how you and more conversation to be had, obviously.
For sure.
Yeah.
I look forward to that between
Totally.
us and
Yep.
however it unfolds.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, for sure.
Thank you
Y'all,
all.
thanks for watching. Really great to be here in Denver. It's great to be back on the air. I'll be back with the next interview from Boulder next Tuesday. I'm going to be interviewing Deb Bopsy. She's an old colleague of mine. She's not old. She's a colleague from
Long
another
time.
time. And she is a faculty member at Naropa in contemplative goodness, and has some good perspectives on social justice and somatic
Great.
stuff. So I'm excited to interview her. Be really well, take good care, and we'll see you next time.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.